Well, welcome everyone to the Seer Speaker Series. Thank you so much for being here. The Seer Speaker Series is a collaborative event with Hal Hall State Parks, the Seer State Parks Foundation. My name is Jeremy Lynn. I'm the interpreter here at the park. I do all the educational programs in this area. We do all sorts of things, cultural history, the natural history, all sorts of different programs, recreational stuff. And so we're just thrilled. We have this amazing group of folks talk about the exhibition. This program is sponsored by Highway 12 Vineyards and Winery. So feel free to go grab a glass of wine if you haven't already. Also, the Truckee Library is back here, that's Rockland, back there. So we're partnering with the Truckee Library to help report out, collaborate on these events. There's some really exciting stuff happening with the Truckee Libraries. Please feel free to talk to Rafa. You're going to check out some of the materials. I also want to give a shout out to the Truckee Tahoe Community Chorus. There's going to be some really fun events coming up, so definitely check into them. The Seer Speaker Series connects the rich cultural and natural history of the region to our local community here. So we're just thrilled it all came out on this kind of snowy day. It feels like we had a couple of weeks. It felt like a real spring summer, and it felt like a bunch of snow, and then this week it's just been back. So thank you all so much for braving the weather and coming out and joining us. So in this Seer Speakers Series presentation, the History Expedition team, we have Bob Crowley, Tim Twietmeyer, Jennifer Hemmen, Elke Reimer, and Hal Hall. They're going to recount their 5-day, 100-mile expedition, retracing the fateful last steps of E. Allen Grosh from Silver City, Nevada to Last Chance, California. And they're going to reveal the discovery story of the world's largest concentration of silver. Maybe we don't know this, it's kind of a contentious history that we're going to be talking about here. So let's actually start off here with our video, and then we'll kind of dive into our conversation about kind of what the expedition, how it traced these stories.
All right, so I'll just say, we are honored to be here. This has been a long time coming. So it's really exciting. The weather, Mother Nature's given us a full dose. We're gonna get a real good feel for what they went through, and it's gonna be fun. But we're thinking of you, Charles, and of course your descendants, and proud to be here. So we'll hand it over to you.
For 1857. Not far from Griffey Sand, along with his young friend Morris Buck, started off for California in the hope of securing a claim for what would come to be known as the conspired, the greatest silver discovery in history. For 8 years, Ethan Allen and his younger brother Hosea, Ballou, worked the gold fields of the West and wrote home to share their adventures with their family, telling tales of new lands and of untold riches just around them. I would become the caretaker of those letters after a fire destroyed my grandparents' home. And as I began transcribing the letters, unfolded a tale so amazing and tragic that I was completely overwhelmed by the scope of the story. So here, a century and a half later, the story continues. From Hosea's grave there in Silver City, Ethan Allen's final resting place at Last Chance, these adventurers will follow the trail that those men traveled a tribute and an admiration of what they endured so long ago. My family and I thank you all who have taken it to your heart in continuing the quest of Ethan Allen and Hosea Grosh. Godspeed, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Few tears on this end too, Charles. Well, thank you. And,
You know, we're gonna connect, the brothers back together again. In spirit and, hopefully physically, if we can make it. One way or another. So,
And I'm there with you in spirit.
yeah, we appreciate that. All right, well, we're gonna sign off from here and, get on to it.
we'll send you a few reviews along the way.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
I could turn this searching question. The arduous task,
We're not kidding.
but well done.
Yeah, our appreciation for what they went through. I think we did good. You know, linking the two and doing what we did, I think that was a great thing.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do some kind of slow introductions here. We're gonna have a little bit of a question answer at the end. But first, I kind of wanted to start off over here with Bob. Bob, can you kind of talk a little bit about, this is Bob Crowley, everyone. Can you please talk a little bit about the kind of inception of this, kind of organizing this, and what went into that?
I will, and thank you all for braving the, not normal May weather. You really just like the people that we like to follow, and we were talking about that on the way up. We said, I bet no one shows up because the weather's bad. Jim said, oh, these are great people. All right, so, Jim and I, have known each other a long time. And, as we got to the point where we didn't want to do ultra marathons, you know, things that are 50, 60, 70, 100 miles, 200 miles, and compete anymore, we still wanted to be outdoors. We still wanted to run, hike. And we also realized we shared a love of history. We would talk hours about books we read, we heard notes. And it dawned on us at one point, I wonder if we could combine the two passions. That's really what history expeditions is. It's combining an interest in being outdoors, experiencing not just the wilderness, but the history firsthand. And then doing the kind of research that maybe academics might do, and that's certainly who has mentored us. So that if we could discover a trail or an artifact or place, or maybe something in history that is not entirely correct, and investigate that, document it, and then go out and actually experience it. That's what we're trying to do. And we started with the 401 Hope. Great story, a derivative from the Donner Group, then the Donner Relief Party a year ago, and now the Grosh Brothers, which is a deviation. It's a mining story, and it's a phenomenal story. But we had to discover the trail that Ethan Allen, the older brother, and Richard Maurice Buck took. That took us a while to rediscover that trail and be sure we were going to be on it. It's about 100 miles from Silver City to Last Chance. But inevitably, when we do these research on something benign like a trail, it leads us to the characters and the protagonists, and that's really when we get 100%, sucked in. It brings us to our tears every time I come into this place. There, I cry. We get very emotional and very tied to the protagonist. Tonight's subject matter, the Grosh Brothers and Morgan's book, are very interesting, very intriguing, and to us, and we hope you, very inspiring people. And so we're honored to share their story tonight with you. And by the way, these books, some of you may have passed them by thinking they're free. We wrote the book. It is about the discoveries we made in both the field research and the book research. And indeed, history is not right on this one. We'll talk about that tonight, what they got wrong. But help yourself, please, to a book. Stickers, there may be a few boxes left back there, but we're all about sharing and trying to be as transparent as possible.
Great. And next to Bob here is Jennifer Hemmen. Can you share us a little bit about kind of your experience with this and kind of your process for completing this expedition?
Well, I got a call a couple years ago from his friend asking, we're looking for someone who wants to snowshoe 100 miles. We're having a Donner Party story. It'll be winter, it'll be cold, and I said, that sounds fantastic. So I just worked with Hal when he started snowshoeing as young adult. So really my part of the puzzle is that I come from a lot of winter experience, a lot of snowshoeing experience. And I'm in California. I've been here for 24 years. It's the longest place I've lived, but I'm from Massachusetts. So I'm East Coast girl in Maine in winter. I was snowshoeing with the way of travel. I did the Donner Party story because Frank knew that was the way you travel in the snow, and he was able to do up these awesome pictures and made the 15 pairs of snowshoes that allow them to escape. And without that piece of knowledge, that might have been us where nobody ever got down. So that's my part of the history of on the East Coast, and then every year, of course, Jim has graciously invited myself back. So I love to be part of these. I am passionate about Western States Trail, and I am learning so much more about African history because I was a child. And that's my part of the puzzle. And the Grosh Brothers in particular, I didn't cry as often, but it really is a great tragedy. It's a very tragic story. There isn't really a silver lining unless you recount that we brought it more to life, back to life, people have said throughout history. But being able to put their faces on the map and say, how hard this must have been for their father to do certain things, and to not know what was going on all the way across the country, to not know how he had lost two sons in such a short time, who had been writing such beautiful letters of their glowing success and their hard work. They really did everything right. I won't get too into it, but they did everything right. They were good people, they were hardworking, they didn't drink, they didn't carouse, and yet they had this food. So it's our job to help spread the true message.
Thank you. And the next agenda item here is Hal Hall. Let's welcome Hal. So Hal, I understand you were kind of the newer addition to the group.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I'm the newbie, I'm the rookie. You might have noticed in the film footage, I was the one slipping and falling. Some of those things that you saw were not in the brochure. But I had the benefit of working with all four of these folks to help them along. My idea of wintertime sport was playing basketball indoors. The idea of being out in the snow and countryside, it never gelled for me. But I was very intrigued by what these four had accomplished in their previous two expeditions, and followed them thoroughly. I love the concept, the history, and the outdoor expedition, and how they combined the two. And it was interesting, you know, Bob and Tim, they asked me the question, we're looking for another expedition. Do you have an idea that maybe in mind? And so I told him the Grosh Brothers story, but I knew it was them. Oh my word, the discoveries that we made for our research subsequent to that. And of course, they invited me along, and were good to me. I know Elke and Bob and I took some time to do some snow camping at Old Donner Pass. Yeah, real serious winter storm. This might it's going to be fun. And in doing, you know, some of the research, it was like, I know even now in Grosh did, and the Canadian companion version one is what, and the results that they found, and now to actually have been able to go across the Sierras in some of the same conditions and the same fashion that they did, have a whole you know, non-perspective that accomplishment with that. And unfortunately, it didn't involve well for that's
Well, thank you for sharing. Next to Hal is Elke Reimer. Let's see what's going on.
I am a California girl. I've been in classrooms now for actually almost an entire life. And have lived in places like Auburn, Colfax, Alpha, the Pines, I think there's going to be, but kind of similar to Jennifer. I gotta call her Jennifer, more than 20, asking, it wasn't that long before the first expedition, if I would be a part of the expedition. I had to think long and hard about it. I've done hard things, but I wasn't quite sure what to expect with all of this. But, you know, fast forward to expedition number 3, I'm so blessed to be part of this thing. It's been really a highlight of my post ultra outdoors. Having Hal be a part of this has just been a blast. I've known Hal for a while. He's a great storyteller. Knows
so much about the Western states, general just the history of gold money, everything around here. And I could listen to these stories forever. So 5 days sounded good. Seriously looking forward to that. And it was fun to, I like clear view. So I had so much fun with how I don't think you'd ever have to go down this. Ever. That was not. Yeah, I know. We have to kind of mention and laying all my stuff out and I have to be showing how the whole system works for adventures and experiences. A little bit different than some of the just make sure that you're comfortable. No, we don't use nets unless it's snowing. And then of course, the night that he was talking about, we stayed on the summit. I think it snowed a foot and a half. And that was truly, yeah. How was that, Hal?
Yes. I'm getting home, it's like my thing. I'm gonna. You know what they're doing.
But
I'm not sure.
he did outstanding. He really did. He was a pro like that. Just always in good spirits, never complaining about anything. So yeah, that was really good.
And he's being incredibly humble. He is one of the great equestrian riders from endurance events in the world. So 31 pet distinguishes and multiple. And the story goes he likes it better. Way more.
Yeah, and in our defense, Tim and I, we do not just recruit people to go 100 miles in the he is an elite athlete of some sport. He is a rare breed and he's remarkable. So, yeah, do not try this at home.
Yes, please.
When we started in Silver City at that time, just on the other side of the fence, on 5 wild Mustangs.
How we knew, the first question he would ask before we left that Silver City Cemetery is, you all right there, right?
That's a sign. Yeah, it's not. Thank you all. Well, please help me welcome Tim Twietmeyer. Talk a little bit about your involvement in this, the preparation and planning.
Yeah, so quick, let me just say, this is our third one, and trying to keep up with Hal and Bob researching is all-day task. I get another email from, let's check this out, and I hadn't written 10 emails before that. I'm just trying to put that, but Hal's phenomenal, and the amount of effort he's put in to tell the story after Grosh dies, Flash Cans, is a lot of work, and they knitted all the dots together to figure out why it is that once EA passed, that, you know, what went on after that is intriguing, and they kind of, you know, pulled that yarn apart, and it's really well done, and it's in the book, so check that out. But I had read it exposed to the Grosh story 20 years ago, and I was fascinated, both because of the gold discovery, but how EA Grosh, even after he had arrived at Last Chance, was so optimistic. I mean, this guy's died in the frostbite. His feet are gone. They've been sleeping in the snow for several nights, and they're just basically on the deathbed. But his letters back to his father were so positive. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'll give you a quick little couple of sentences about how he writes back to his father when it's EA finally Hosea passes, and you find that real quick here. It just kind of gives you a great example of how these guys, their father was a minister, and so they were very religious folks. And almost every letter they wrote, they told them for 8 years trying to find gold, back and forth between El Dorado, Nevada, Sacramento, San Francisco, back and forth they went. And always striking out, this end, they finally made it. Anyway, here it is, here it is. It's Alan Grosh writing back to his father after Hosea passes. He says, I take up my pen with the heavy heart, for I have sad news to send you. God has seen fit in his perfect wisdom and goodness to call Hosea, the patient, the good, the gentle, to join his mother in another and better world than this. Now those guys were as tight as you could be, two brothers, and here he's writing back to his father, almost like this is it's not positive, but let me tell you why this is better than him passing. And so I was fascinated by the story, and it actually inspired me to do a winter crossing of the Western States Trail from Squaw Valley to Palisades now to Auburn. And it was in that inspiration from the letters from EA back to his father that said, you know, this is a different breed of folks. You know, these guys went 8, almost 9 years trying to find the promised land. And the minute they found it, it was basically taken away from them. So the story was just phenomenal as far as, you know, this tragedy of these guys toiling and then losing it. And then these guys did the homework to say, hey, you know, this is the story worth retelling.
One of the things that inspired us about the Grosh Brothers was how optimistic they were. Now they came from Pennsylvania through Mexico and then ship up to San Francisco with about 50 or 60 other people from the sort of Reading, Marietta, Pennsylvania, but it's York, Reading, that area. And so a whole bunch came out seeking fortune and a better life. The only two that survived that didn't go home were the Grosh Brothers. Everyone else got, you know, very disillusioned and acted pretty quickly. Since the 8.5 years they toiled, trying to find gold, and they would find just enough to sustain them to sort of the next month. I think that would frustrate anyone. At some point, you say, we're never going to find it. The El Dorado doesn't exist. We're going back to our home. But if you read their letters, we have a surprise tonight, which we'll share later. These letters have been preserved. They're so rare to have 82 letters and correspondence over a period of years during the gold rush from these two very articulate and intelligent brothers back home saying, no matter what happens. And I mean, literally right down to what Tim read, where the older brother Ethan loses his younger beloved brother, and you heard what he said and the way he said it. Later on, we'll give you a quote from what he wrote 3 days before he died in the last chance. This is Ethan now to his father, absolutely 100% sure he was going to not only survive, but make it to the SA's office in Grass Valley, to then reveal the fact that they had discovered what was to become the Comstock loader. It was all queued up, and he died 3 days later. But when you hear his words and the level of optimism and what he's been through to get to that point, I think all of us would have been so despondent, so lost, and yet he had something inside of him that was so inspirational. So it's a really fascinating story in a great tragedy on multiple levels.
Excellent. So soon we have a special guest zooming in. We'll introduce him in a moment. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about the actual expedition itself, and we'll kind of launch into some of the kind of maybe correcting history. Once we kind of get to that. But can you all tell us a little bit about just the process of the expedition, and maybe if there was some hard days? I also believe that you changed your date for the expedition based on snow this year. You know, I'll talk a little bit about that planning and that decision to change it, and kind of what the conditions were when you actually did set out for the expedition.
Okay.
Sure. We originally set out on February 27th. And we were, staging for from Silver City. And as you probably saw that early on in the expedition, it was windy, but, not snowing right at the outset. Maybe the forecast, however, wasn't favorable to our intensification. We wanted to get started, give it our best shot. So that's what we did. Day one, we traveled from Silver City to Over Creek Campground. I don't know if you all know what that is, but the north end of Washoe Lake. And as our journey progressed, the weather got worse. And our last few hours out there, at least a few hours, it was pretty heavy snowfall. Back to the campground, I think it was the campground supervisor, the ranger, whatever, said, we realize there's a terrible forecast here. Get ready, camp here, and he said, yes. But, that actually pushed the freeway down for 2 days, and we were stuck. It wasn't smart, it wasn't responsible, it wasn't even possible to go further, so we had to basically take plan A of the plan B and C 22. And we ended up staying in Reno for a couple of days until the freeway opened up, so that was day one. And then we rescheduled for 2 months. Yeah. And we had a much better weather window, but boy, there's snow up there. There's a lot of snow up there.
How much of our audience lives in the area? Instead of winter, at least part of the winter here. Yeah, so it's, you can kind of flashback to when they were trying to attend this, and we didn't really know what kind of winter we were going to have at that point. It started off pretty strong, but there was really no indication that it would be this kind of record-breaking.
Well, I might add real quick, the first story a little bit, there's a story about the runaway donkey. And there's been a donkey with him, and he goes on a hiatus a couple of times. Well, Elke's pet went on a hiatus, and we came around. We woke up and Elke's like, like she's looking more like that's like, where'd the pet go? So we were on a full hunt for out of the donkey, but the pet, we finally found it. Yeah.
But it was so dangerous where we were camping that Elke and I and many others often sleep inside the bath. Because Slide Mountain is called Slide Mountain because the Yankees had actually slid from the top all the way across the United States. And the local who was staying with us, Ballou, would come by with some drinks and to visit the campfire. He said, oh, you don't tell. What is this? He said, you probably should spend that bathroom.
There's a clean campground bathroom with showers. And yeah, it's not the secret.
So before we got to the day on the campsite, I'm not sure Bob was him or somebody was dialing up on their cell what the orange was. And it's gone from orange to red, red being the worst. And that pretty much kiboshed and really the icing on the cake was we had hired a gentleman who had a snow cat come extract us from the last camp because the snow fields couldn't get inside. So I don't know, and he apparently correct me if I'm mistaken, but it's sort of like, well, fellas, I can't come get you. Well, why is that? For 35 years or something like that, I've been in business. It's the first time I can't get my snow cat out of the driveway. Yeah, that's sort of like, yeah. So, yeah, it was the end of the world, but we picked it up. 2 months later from that very spot.
And there was an avalanche at almost in Tahoe the Wednesday that they were supposed to be going.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the conditions for us in April 19th to the 22nd were blue skies, which were great, but as Elke alluded to, the amount of snow we drawn was significant. We saw it in the tree wells, 20 to 30 feet in many places. But what was also equally enlightening for us in terms of what probably Buck, Ethan Allen went through, was the variable conditions, meaning first thing in the morning, you saw snowshoeing almost on top. Icy, great conditions. About 11 o'clock is what we get. Sierra cement, and we're siding. So we're having to cut into the side of the hill, and it's coming out from underneath us, and we're sinking. So now posting, and we're wanting to follow in the leader's footsteps, just like they do with the Tour de France. There's a reason the peloton gets behind the leader, he breaks the wind. In this case, he breaks the trail. And so we all took turns, and it's exhausting. So we went through that phase. That was just new. Then we switched over to Palisade, Tahoe, and off the back, and the Tahoe National Forest. And we had conditions where the wind had blown much of the snow against us. So we're side hillings coming down into the valley. And we're just on the side of the hill. One snowshoe can dig in, the other one can't. And it's tedious. We're going at probably 1 mile an hour at best. In some cases, we were doing a half a mile an hour. And it was absolutely great. And so we just didn't know what to put on our feet. Snowshoes, we have little spikes that we can put underneath our boots, or just regular hiking boots. We did all three. And it's, as those of you that snowshoe or go out in the snow, you know it's time consuming to take the equipment on, put it off. We lose that precious 15, 20 minutes. You add that up where we're doing it every hour. And we got 6 miles behind in the first day.
Carrying winter packs. If you fall, you have to negotiate this, anywhere between 30 and 60 pounds on your back to get back up.
And the Grosh Brothers would experience that because he was carrying his maps, his assays, his core samples, which were very heavy. And it gave us a good sense of, they didn't have snowshoes. They were actually coming to the boat thinking there would be fall conditions. So we were able to see once that storm hit them and they were lost in the whiteout and they killed their eat it, they were then struggling in their shoes. And even now I'm at the very end of that, which leads to part of the story, which is that he does eventually put all of his proof of finding the Comstock Road into a hideaway spot in order to save his life, so that they can make more money. So we have pictured ourselves with this heavy backpack, years and years of maps, and courses that he was bringing the grass out, and he had to abandon it. And that was a really big decision for him. We were able to really feel that we struggled.
You could draw on screen. Yes. And while we get our special guest on screen, I just want to know, were there any, I guess, mistakes made? You lost. I'm just kind of thinking, if I was up there looking at these things, I thought wrong direction. How are you guys navigating? How are you making sure you have enough food? Because you talked about all your food. How is that? Maybe explain to all the audience here how you kind of reconcile that. Like a sea turtle now.
Well, much like Hal stays trail on his horse more than 30 times. All of us have run the stage trail more than once and trained on it. We know that trail really, really well. And so we kind of have to keep waypoints and we know along the way that we have to get to what the Bob said as Bob and hop on the minute. We were way behind. So on the last night when we wanted to get the last chance, Bob and I got up a little bit early and we wanted to get the last chance to find the stone. And we were on the trail by 3, but I can tell you, trying to navigate the snow in the dark with a headlamp is one of the most frustrating things that I've ever in life, especially if there's no trail to follow. You don't know exactly where you're going. So Bob had the trail kind of on his phone, and then his headlamp went out. He started finicking. So, it's getting a little weird there because it's so hard to navigate the snow, the trees, everything looks like a road or a trail, and trying to stay on it. You literally have to go back to your track every 2 or 3 minutes to make sure you're not off in the ditch or off to the side. And so, yeah, I've done that once before when I did winter crossing 20 years ago. It was the same kind of thing, just one of them was frustrating things. But luckily, after a while, we finally got on the bare ground, and once we got on the area that we knew really well, then we recognized based on the road. And so, yeah, the simulation of it didn't quickly start. Of course, there wasn't a movement, so it was 2, 3 in the morning. We were in the woods, and we were following a track. So there's a blue track on my phone. And our dot shows up, the same dot you were following, we were following. But, my headlamp went out, so I needed Tim's light, so he'd go up front, so he could see. But we're in the woods, and it's all flat, because it's snow. And I would say 1 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and literally, I'm following the track with the dot on it, and I'm directing him by the clock. Just like a bird, look for birds, right? We look up and it said 10 o'clock. I'm guiding him by the clock, saying, no, 10, 11, 12. And that's how we got through about 3 hours to get the last bit. It's like,
But they would split and then come back together and then split and then come back together. But just like the Grosh Brothers, they actually went into deeper and found that they were so excited and realized in that story that they had circled back onto themselves in that same area. They knew miners were somewhere in the but the devastation left the belt and realized they gone an entire protest during the storm. Knowing that their lives weren't fine, we didn't circle back.
Great, so, please help me welcome Charles T. Wegner. Do you have audio? Can you do a little sound check, Charles? Yeah. Sure. Give a second.
Charles, can you unmute yourself or do I need to do it? And we're gonna do this.
We have this audio in. We got
He's unmuted.
it's unmuted, and then we had this working just
Can
then.
everyone see in the back?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Oh, okay.
Was that it?
Yep,
So
that was it. Thanks.
Okay, no problem.
So we can put there we go.
So Charles, can you just explain to us a little bit about how you're tied into the story and your family history here?
Okay, it's a very long story. I knew about the Grosh brother letters having been in the family from when I was a small child. I recall the first time I knew about them when I was about 8 years old. My mother and father bought me a copy of the encyclopedia, World Book, and they showed me in the Comstock load a mention of Ethan Allen and Hosea Ballou Grosh having been the probable discoverers of that. And they told me about the letters that were at my grandparents' house. Many years later, in the 80s, my grandparents' house had a fire, and I was helping do some cleanup there, and I found the letters in a strongbox out in the yard. They had just been thrown out of the attic by the firefighters. I took them to my grandmother, and she said, "You should keep them." And so I took them, and they stayed under a bed for many more years. And then in the 90s, I had a few years where I had some time that I could devote to it, and I began unfolding the letters, which was an arduous task in itself, because they had been damaged by water and fire on several occasions. And then I began transcribing them. And from the moment I began transcribing them, I was hooked. It's an absolutely amazing story. The 8 years and Ethan Allen was such a wonderful and perfect writer. I mean, he just he described their adventures and their day-to-day life in such wonderful detail. And it was so personal. And so then I began searching for where these letters should be. And I called the Smithsonian. They didn't know what to do with them, but they put me in touch with Yale. I talked to a historian at Yale, and he said, well, we'd love them, but this is the East Coast, and nobody east of the Mississippi really is going to really care too much about this story so much. So he put me in touch with people out west, and finally I ended up speaking with everyone at the Nevada Historical Society, and Eric Moody in particular, and Fred Hollibird. Those two people were instrumental above all others in helping me get those letters to the Nevada Historical Society, and where they now reside. And the rest is, to coin a phrase, history.
It seems as though we might have some corrections to make to what we commonly know as the Comstock load. Should this be called the Grosh load, do you think? Or can you talk a little bit about Henry Comstock's role in this?
The funny thing about it is there's zero mention of Henry Comstock in any of the Grosh letters. I would think that Ethan Allen would have written about him in that last letter that he wrote back to his father, because he wrote about several other people who were to get either information or had information that was pertinent to the whole claim or probable claim. So it stands to reason that, Henry Comstock was just a kind of a tertiary fringe fixture in the whole story, but he ended up in the right place in the right time. And so that it's the fact that it is the Comstock load doesn't bother me, that it's not the Grosh load. History makes its own rules. It's, they tried. I mean, they tried, then the family tried through the lawsuits in San Francisco, but it stands for what it is. But the letters really do tell the story.
Well, we have a question and answer session coming up. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask either Charles or the expedition team. But I also suppose, Charles, can you talk a little bit about kind of what you, in reading these letters and kind of discovering these letters, what are some of the things that have impressed you, or some of the kind of takeaways from these letters that you kind of uncovered and were responsible for sending out to the world? Is there anything kind of that really stands out you'd like to convey to us today?
The way they conveyed the whole 49 gold fever was pretty interesting. Everyone in their group that went down there to Mexico and across to San Francisco had gold fever, and apparently it was nationwide, worldwide. Everyone wanted to go to California to get gold, and I think everybody who didn't have a mortgage pretty much packed up and went. They were, I think the fact that they had each other was key, because without that, it really was an arduous and thankless task out there. They always had each other, which most people out there I don't think did.
Do we have any questions in the audience here towards either Charles or our expedition team? Yeah, right there.
Charles, how are you related to the Grosh Brothers?
Back through my grandmother's grandfather was their brother, Warren Grosh. He was too young to go out. He wanted to go with them, but the family wouldn't let him go. He was, I believe he was like 16, 17 years old. And they just were like, no, you're too young. And so he stayed, and I'm a direct lineage down through that.
Yeah, so what was the evidence in the backpack? You know, what was the totality of the evidence they had in the backpack?
Well,
Yes.
the backpack that they had essays.
I think, I believe they packed up an awful lot of, well, they had to have all their travel goods, food rations, snowshoes, blah, blah, blah. But they did, apparently, they were headed across the Sierras to get because there was no government in the Utah territories at the time in Nevada. They had to go to California to do anything legal for the claims. So they had all the papers and some assay samples that they had, and those were what they had with them. They abandoned those to save their lives, tragically.
So the backpack had maps. What claims they had, now in Nevada at the time, it hadn't been formalized, so it was a modest way in which they could make 300 claims at the time in which they did it. But the real essays that counted were in California. They were heading to Grass Valley. That's why they took the route they took, because there was an infamous assays there, and they figured they had discovered what they told their father in the letters, 3 monster bays. And then Hosea hit his foot with a pickaxe and died suddenly. And 3 months later, Ethan Allen died at last chance due to hypothermia and frostbite. 90-day span, they both were gone. Soon thereafter, right after they had been discovered, but the purpose was to get the essayists to confirm what they thought they found, and then they'd go to San Francisco and raise money. Because they were one step away from having money to buy the equipment to do the silver mining that they needed, because they're growing into the side of the hill, into the veins, the monster veins that they found, in order to extract more proof and evidence that they had actually hit a silver lode. And they had indeed hit just that, but they had to abandon all of that because it was way too much. They were lost, hungry, starving, hypothermia, frostbitten. And their thesis was, we need to get to the American River. We need to follow the water. And the head of the American River was right there in a little valley called Little American Valley. And so they said, let's throw everything away. Let's bury it. Let's mark it so that we can come back to it, which they did. And let's run down the hill for our lives, and we'll follow the water all the way down to what is today French Meadow. And they were on the middle port of, middle port. And they were looking for what? Brown water. Why brown? Because that would be evidence that there's mining activities upstream. They're looking for humans. They needed food, they needed warmth, they needed someone to save them. And so they continued to follow the water, and there was no ground anywhere. And so they struggled on. And ultimately, at some point, Maurice Buck said, let's make this our last night. Let's lay down in the snow, and let's never wake up again. And Ethan Allen said, no. Until we can not move one foot in front of the other, we will go on. And he inspired Buck to do that, and that's what they did. They drugged themselves along the river, and eventually heard dogs barking, which led them to some Mexicans that were up in the Miller's Petite area, mining. The dogs revealed these 2, strung out miners. The Mexicans brought them up, and then they let people in last chance 6 miles away up. They came over with sleds and they drugged them to last chance, where there were, 30, 40, 50 people. Much better chance of getting warmth, food, and any kind of medical help. So the belongings were gone, and one of the things that we have found is history said, that was a myth. They never buried anything. They never had anything. They never put it in a tree and they didn't bark it. That's a myth. Goes along with the old Virginia stories and the old pancake stories about Comstock. And we felt that may not be fair, that they were being lumped in with characters to draw attention to the media, draw attention to the area versus genuine, genuine miners and entrepreneurs that had discovered monster veins. And our research found that indeed, these weren't characters, they had their, these assets. And Buck lived, remember, Buck knew where they buried them. And when they interviewed Buck soon thereafter, before they amputated his feet and after they amputated his feet, he admitted back in the hills, in a tree that had fallen, was all of this evidence buried. But he was paid, his way to get back to Canada and get away from all of this and have a illustrious doctor career, he became very close friends with Walt Whitman. He became a prolific author and a prolific doctor. When he was called back to California 6-7 years later, he was called back by the very man that paid for him to go to California, or from California to Canada, to have his feet repaired and to start his career. So there was a quid pro quo. And remember, we said right after this incident, the story was we buried everything in the pine tree and we'll come back to it. 6 years later, the story was we just threw it all in the snow. No one knows where it is. There is no evidence. It's gone. Well, who was the man that paid for him to go to Canada and then bring him back? Adolphus Bull. And who was Adolphus Bull? Well, among other things, he was the chairman and president of the Ophir Mining Company and the Gould and Curry Mining Company. Who were they? They were the two largest mining companies at the time in Nevada, and they pulled themselves $200 billion of assets then, $1.5 billion worth of assets now. Why did they call Buck back? To testify against Charles's family. To turn him on a quid pro quo, to say there never was evidence, and to put the I dot Bull went into the wilderness where we just came back from. With who? Buck on horseback. And what did they do? He said, Buck, take me to this place. And son of a gun, the evidence was never found. It disappeared. There was no evidence.
They abandoned.
Yeah.
They found it.
The abandoned he claims that there was never
And thus the lawsuits were dismissed because there wasn't the hard evidence. Buck went back to Canada and had an illustrious career. Interestingly, his fate, his death was an accident. He slipped on ice and cracked his head open. And Bull fell off the Presidio cliffs into the ocean. And that's how he. So the Greek tragedy here, right, does seem to come to the fore.
Before coming up here, I looked on my computer screen and in the folders that we created of what we read and what we researched, there were, I think, 32 electronic copies of books about the Comstock Lode or something like that. Probably in the neighborhood of 80 newspaper accounts pulled up off the internet. And that's not including, the hard copies of articles and books that we have as well. And it's interesting, historians who wrote those books end their story in Last Chance, for the most part. They might have made reference to, there was a survivor, Buck. He goes back to Canada, studies medicine, becomes a doctor, and end of story. Because everyone believed that the evidence was lost in the hills, in the mountains. And there was one exception. And he wasn't even a historian. He was a doctor who studied the life of Richard Maurice Buck, who wanted to follow his life from start to finish. And in that study, and it happens to be where he, this doctor who writes the story of the book, goes to the same university, in London, Canada, and studies medicine there and becomes a physician himself. So he writes, and that's where we found that Buck returns to California. Well, what? That was such a turning point in my mind. And this, why is he going back? He was a broken man. He had nothing. He didn't want anything to do with the California Board of that. It's interesting because from that we've determined where he derived his research from Western University and their archives. And contacting the university there, we find there's an index, what's in the collection, manuscripts that's never been published, a diary, letters, correspondence, with Charles's descendant, A.D. Grosh, the father of Hosea and Ethan Allen. That correspondence was between Buck and A.D. Grosh, the father, and it tells the tale. Much more than anything that any historian had ever done. There was one historian that made reference that he couldn't find. He had heard that there was an unpublished manuscript. I think it's Charles Shin, the historian. He tried to find it, couldn't find it. Well, we found it. That tells you everything you need to know. What Buck did know, what Buck didn't know, who were the players, and how Comstock comes into play. And of course, we found out, and we collaborated all of that document, that research by whatever other sources. And one was which Comstock, before Ethan Allen left the cabin in Silver City, he contracted with Comstock for 1/4 interest in one of the claims. Didn't tell him where it was up on Mount Davidson, but if you protect our cabin and the strong box that's left behind, we'll give you a 1/4 interest. Comstock, upon hearing of that, of the death of Ethan Allen, last chance, of course, ransacks the cabin. Unfortunately for Comstock, he couldn't read or write, and he didn't understand what he was looking at. And interesting, but he knew that the boys had been up on the mountain. He was sheep. Comstock was a sheep herder. His sheep were up there, and he just kind of monitored the progress that was being made by other prospectors, and that's how it all came about.
And to emphasize how important the Grosh Brothers and their find of the Comstock lode, these monster days, which ultimately led to the Comstock lode, which was $500 million of money extracted at that time. It's over $3 billion in today's wealth. President Lincoln, in the ending of the Civil War, sat 2 gentlemen down in his office the very day he was headed to the Ford's Theater. One was a guy named Schuyler Colfax, Laura Colfax in town. And the other, he was Secretary of State at the time, and the other was a guy named Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. And he said to them, I need to connect the country from coast to coast. And Colfax, I want you to go west because we've heard of this find in Nevada, this wealth. And Nevada was in a state at the time. And he said, I need you to do 2 things. I need you to figure out how can we use that wealth for the good of the nation, reparation with the slaves, bring the country together coast to coast, pay down the debts of the war, which were huge. And I also need you to use the railroad to connect the coast. So your trip, starting as soon as you can go, is to accomplish both those things. And he did it. He didn't go to the theater that night, obviously, nor did Grant, by the way. But Grant loved his whiskey and his cigars. He hated the theater. They were both invited. They both said no. Colfax did come out here, and one of the things that Colfax did while he was in Virginia City was he participated in the ceremony. The ceremony went from Virginia City south, about 2-3 miles to Silver City. And what was the ceremony? It was the relocation of a minor that had been respected by all the normal people, all the real minors that had been disrupted. And so they said that they wanted to move his gravesite closer to where he really had done his best work, to Silver City. That was the younger brother. So the younger brother gets buried, and who shows up at the ceremony? But Secretary of State Colfax to preside over a stranger at his gravesite. And the words that he spoke, and we'll paraphrase, are, "There is no one that could have given more to our country than these two brothers, Hosea Ballou and Ethan Allen." And why? Because their find, their discovery, their ingenuity, their grit created all this wealth, which will pay down the nation's debt, which will free the slaves, which will make this great state, this great area a state, which it did. And ultimately, it is the ignition that was used to move the country to the next level. And Colfax gave the Grosh Brothers full credit for that on that day.
Absolutely. Well, we're a little past our time here, so let's do a close here, but maybe stick around a little bit after if you have any other questions. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And stay tuned for our upcoming speaker series. They're every month, and we'll be announcing our next month pretty soon here. Thank you all for joining us, and feel free to stick around if you have any other questions. Feels like we could talk about this for a while.
And feel free to hook up, because everything we didn't say is in there.
Yes. Thank you, Highway 12 Winery and Vineyards. And Ross, did you have something to say?
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick announcement that today is the 154th anniversary of the Old Spike celebration, where we completed the Trans-Continental Railroad. We have it at the Community Center over Park and Rec at 6 o'clock. We're going to be doing the U.S. Forest Service short documentary legacy, honoring the Chinese railroad workers. And I want you all to be aware of the fabulous historical societies that we have at the summit, here in town, and the Railroad Society. We owe them a world of thanks for the work that they're doing in current era. We want to celebrate and acknowledge that work. Wednesday night at Hemmen.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Made it. You want to say good morning to
Charles?
Charles? I'm gonna webcam
I don't know if you can see me.
I can hear you.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much.
Well,
That
thank
was
you.
incredibly special. We recorded this, so we'll get a copy of it, send it to you, and we still need to have our own
Yes.
get together. We'll do that. You and I will correspond, and we'll put that on the calendar.
Sounds great. Yep.
Sounds great. Thank you. Have a great.
Thank you so much,
rest of the weekend.
Charles.
Oh, thank everyone. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to participate. It was quite the honor.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Charles.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.